Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have another roundtable discussion with Tommy Flanagan and James Smith. Today we talk about all things movement, speed, and agility. Tommy and James are really doing great things with their athletes in terms of speed and agility, and really challenging the perception on agility and speed and motor learning skill acquisition. So this is a great episode. I'm trying to cut down on these intro times, so we're going to get right to it with Tommy and James. You're in store for a great episode, so let's get right to it. Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. Today we have two special guests. We got Tommy Flanagan and James Smith. Guys, how you doing?
Doing fantastic.
Perfect. Let's just give a little brief background from everybody. James, let's start with you. Talk about what you're doing these days, how you got there, a little background on yourself.
Yeah, of course. It's kind of the same story you typically hear. Was an athlete. I was an overachiever, 5'8", 160 pounds going into college, was a Division II athlete, played basketball, did everything, I thought I was supposed to do. It was nonstop, man, 24/7, 365, 3-day sessions, just basketball. Got in my freshman year, ton of patellar knee pain, 4 knee surgeries later in less than a year. My basketball career was short-lived. So I basically fell in love with the weight room. I was known to not go to class. I was known to, where's Jamie? He's in the weight room. So I was fortunate to have really, really good strength coaches it was at Merrimack College in North Andover, Massachusetts, to kind of direct me. I had 3 different guys while I was there, but the 2 that really had an impact directed me, gave me great guidance. And from there, I worked for Mike Boyle, MBSC. I worked up in the North Andover location at the time. Now they're in Middleton. Was there for 2 years, and both views, Mike is a huge, he's unbelievable. I've really learned, besides the strength and conditioning or physical preparation, I've really learned a lot from a business standpoint and from a personal standpoint, how to handle myself and how to grow as a person. And then from there, I went down to University of Connecticut, worked with men's basketball, I worked under Chris West. It was the year we won the national championship. It was that last Big East title, true Big East title, before it all broke up, split up, but 5 days, 5 games, 5 wins, and straight to the national title. So it was an awesome experience. And then after that, my girlfriend at the time, but now my wife, was like, I'm not staying down in Connecticut because that's where I'm originally from. I'm going back up to Mass. And I said, okay. So I went back up. I worked very short it's called Total Performance Sports. It's more of a powerlifting strongman. I just try to get as much experience. Still at the time I was young. I was 21, 22 years old, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Was there for a very, very short time. After that, I got connected with the Islanders Hockey Club, which is a youth hockey organization up here in Massachusetts, and it's gigantic. We have every single kid comes to the Islanders Hockey Club, and so I worked there for about 5 years, and then I opened up the U.S. Strength, and now I'm working with pretty much anyone you can think of, from BMX to hockey. So I'm very fortunate, 8 years old, to guys that are coming back to me from the Hockey East level in the summertime. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
Perfect. Tommy?
Yeah. So I'm a Colorado native here. I born and raised in Lakewood, Colorado. Played 3 sports in high school, but you could not find me in the weight room. So mine was more of a non-meathead approach, I guess. But anyway, had a successful high school career in Lakewood, Colorado, for my football career. Followed it to the University of South Dakota for 2 years. Unfortunately, some things turned around and kind of had to go back to Nebraska Kearney for 2 years and ended up transferring. I was only there for about a year and a half. I came home and trained. Had a pursuit of a short professional career, not playing, but a couple workouts with some teams and stuff like that. And then obviously studied exercise science kinesiology along the way. And ended up actually graduating from Colorado Mesa So I needed to finish my college career because I jumped out of my academics for about a semester to come back home just from circumstances and whatnot. So ended up doing that. I actually didn't end up working for any sports performance right away. My dad started a business and he needed help right away. So I actually worked for him. But as I was working for him, I was reading absolutely every book I could absolutely get my hands on. I think I learned more in those 3 months than I ever did sitting in a classroom for college. It was absolutely the biggest blessing. At the time, it wasn't. I absolutely started to resent my dad for starting a business and pissed off at a football career ending. But ended up working with him for quite some time, actually, and then reading all of this stuff and putting it to use on my own training. I still kind of thought, let me get another year or something on my career. So I was still training and still putting a lot of this stuff to use on my own. But I ended up applying, crazy story, being a man of faith. The good Lord did not have a plan for me right away because I applied at every facility in Colorado and not one returned a phone call. And ended up starting my own. I just jumped out on a limb and started reaching out and started training a lot of people. I think it was helpful because I was in Colorado and had I could still kind of pull out my athletic career for as long as I could, in regards to name dropping a little bit, in regards to, this is what I was doing, this is what I, did. But luckily I was trying to train people the way I kind of played. And that was kind of what we'll have a conversation about. But I think that's where that started. And, over the past 2.5 years, I've only, short stint of 2.5 years, had a lot of ups and downs with business, been kind of sleeping on a lot of other people's couches. I was actually running a lot of my stuff out of CrossFit gyms. And just yesterday, finding out I can finally advance and opening my own spot. I'll get stuff like that on Monday, which has been the most stressful yet most exciting opportunity to have, because I think it's attractive. I mean, you throw green turf down and everybody believes that you know what you're talking about, regardless of anything, which is awesome. But it's been a good ride, and I am so excited. I've had a lot of mentors via phone, via books, and I'll name drop Sean Mishka for sure. I mean, I think I bug him quite a bit, and hopefully when he listens, he'll be okay with it, because I sure text him quite a bit, and I think he just attracted me so much to this stuff, and wouldn't be here if that gentleman didn't do what he did, and being able to be willing and intentional with me reaching out to him consistently, and just shooting it back and forth. So that's kind of a long story short on how this is going.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, congrats on the facility.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be sweet. I'm excited.
That's awesome. Yeah, Sean's an awesome guy. I'm hopping on a call with him later on, but he's
he told me that.
There's no one more passionate about movement than that man. So, and that's, I think, that's why we're all here today, us three talking, because I really enjoy and love what you guys are doing and sharing on movement. And so, kind of want to talk about all that today. But Tom, let's stay with you for a second. You're sharing a lot of videos and whatnot, and I get a little bit. I love what you're doing. I get a little bit distracted when you're outside because you got the beautiful mountains in the background, just a gorgeous backdrop. But talk about how are you trying to? How's your theories or thoughts on movement changed the past couple of years?
Oh, completely, absolutely. So I think when I first started business, I was actually fortunate because I heard of this stuff, constraints-led approach, all this stuff via Sean. Through a guy that I used to play with who he trained. So at the beginning of my career, I was doing a decent job. I was like, we do reactive training, but hey, run to this cone and I'll tell you when to stop, type attitude. But I think a lot of what changed the most, fast forwarding here within 2 years, is probably my approach in regards to letting my kite strings fly and not overcoaching them. And really allowing a lot of my athletes, when we do a lot of this perception action-based drilling, to really solve the problems themselves instead of them looking over at me. Because I noticed that first when I really started diving really deep into it, my athletes were always looking at me. And I was like, crud, I did a horrible job because I'm holding their hand. And I've noticed a lot of my guys training, they look amazing when they're training for me. amazing during close drills when we were, practicing just the art of deceleration, learning how to stop, learning how to change direction. I'm like, these guys are awesome. Well, I show up on their games, some of them on Friday nights, and I'm like, well, first off, we're not playing. Second off, why aren't you playing? You kill it. You're strong, you're fast, you move well, but you have no problem solving skills whatsoever. And I think that's what really changed my my thought process along with training was really diving in and more of the problem solving aspect of it instead of just aimlessly having these guys go through reactive based training or reaction or saying, get around me, and it's like, well, sweet. What am I actually looking at when I tell you what you're doing, what you're seeing, how you're feeling it? What kind of pressure do you feel? What kind of constraint am I approaching with this? Is it open? Is it closed? Is it tight? Et cetera. So I think that was a lot of it. I just noticed a lot of my guys weren't making really good decisions. But I think that's kind of, fast forwarding pretty quick on how mine's changed quite a bit with really allowing the guide strings to fly and allow these guys to really take ownership of what they're doing and really feel what they're good and bad at and what they need to work on and what they can really use when it comes to, say, a Friday night for a football player or softball or whatever it is that I'm working with.
Perfect. How about you, James? How's your thought process kind of evolved over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, almost exactly what Tommy said. I'm the type. A couple of years back, I was a coach. I was in control of everything. It was my way. You need to do it this way. And the more I started videotaping, the more I, would have. So one of the things we do at the U of Strength is we try to get as much video as possible, whether it's practice, whether it's, games and competition, because obviously it's a different environment. All three, the physical preparation stuff, the practicing and the competitions, all different environments, different stresses. You're going to have different responses. When I was working, specifically with an organization, it was lucky because the ice rink and the weight room, everything was there. So it was easy for me to see games, do all that stuff. And so it just kind of hit on me. I'm like, just like what Tommy said, it's just, they look great. They look like studs, when we were doing our closed drills or any type of, at the time what I thought was a change of direction or agility work. They looked awesome. And then by the time when they go to their practice, not even competition, but their practice, it just wasn't clicking. It wasn't sticking. These kids were not – there was a disconnect. And I had to look in the mirror and be like, what the heck am I doing? Because the number one thing I tell my guys is that, yes, I'm a competitive power lifter. I like to lift heavy stuff, and that's what my kids love about me. But that's not why you're here. You're here to become a better – whatever sport it is, if you're a 3-sport, if you're a 1-sport, 2-sport, whatever it may be, that's why you're here. And we need to address the different movements, the different skills, and so one thing that we really try to teach our guys is that everything's a skill. And so we have this kind of a holistic approach, whether we're doing bench press, because I still see value and, I still see value in, just your basic foundational strength movements. But having this holistic approach and making connections and understanding that these are skills and this is why we do things, but really just allowing these kids to figure it out themselves. And so the more I read, what you were posting, Sean was posting, really anything I could find on this whole perception action type stuff, I was starting to do. But I almost was like, all right, I need to have some type of confirmation that other guys are doing it as well, because I was seeing a difference. And the minute I started seeing this stuff, I was like, all right, I'm on the right page now. And so I just kept building off it. But the biggest thing is that as a coach, and I think Sean Mishkett was said this, is that you're a facilitator. You're not, especially with the movement stuff, is I want to guide these athletes. I want them to figure out the right way and the wrong way. And honestly, a lot of times I want them to feel the wrong way, because the more they can feel that ineffective response or approach, then they can start to distinguish and separate between, their, the most effective way for them as an individual. And everyone, as everyone's going to be different. Not everything's not going to be, picture perfect, if you from a biomechanical standpoint. But they need to be their self coaches. They need to have self-organization. They need to really, become their own problem solvers. So that was the biggest thing is I'm a guy of results. I don't care. And I don't really care about what, the scientific studies or any research says. If things are working, I'm sticking with it. And, if my guys are getting better and, they're signing, they're getting scholarships, they're making varsity, whatever it may be, but their performance is increasing, I'm running with it and I'm going to keep doing it. And that's honestly the biggest thing I've done that was actually when we were talking at the beginning, Michael, that was the reason why I decided to come, to the facility I'm at now this past fall was the open space. And for me to really kind of just run with this and really try to figure out different ways and different activities to really let these guys kind of embrace their own, authentic movement solutions. So.
Yeah, what you guys both said there, I think the hardest thing with kind of this movement or this wave is viewing coaching as being a facilitator and, being more hands-off and letting kids make mistakes and not overcoaching. That's the hardest thing as a young coach or any coach. You're a coach, so you think, I have to give instructions. I have to give feedback. I have to give explicit feedback all the time. And it seems like people view that if you just step back and a kid makes a mistake and, hey, you don't say anything, that's not coaching. When, like you said, in reality, they have to be able to understand when they make mistakes, they have to have a learning experience from that. And I was at a clinic last week speaking, and a guy slipped and fell. And, I don't say anything. And everyone's like, well, he fell. Are you going to tell him something? Like, he fell. Like, what am I going to tell him? He know that he fucked up or he know he made a mistake. I don't need to tell him that. It was like in football, I dropped the pass. Coach said, you dropped the pass. Like, no shit, I dropped the pass. You don't need to tell me. I know that. I'm internalizing that. I'm going to make an adjustment. So being hands-off sometimes is the hardest thing. I still have trouble with that, but I love that point you guys made on being hands-off and being a facilitator. Are there things that you guys have in mind going into a session with your athletes in terms of a game plan to facilitate more? Are there things that you're trying to follow? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah. So basically, what we do is we have an emphasis. So we want to have some type of organization. So depending on. Obviously, it depends. Context is everything, depending on the individual. But we'll say just with the high school group, because we primarily work, with middle school and high school age athletes. But so say the high school group, we'll have, I follow a high-low approach. So we basically consolidate all of our stressors on the same day. So on our high days when we're focusing on, either it's a linear approach or it is a lateral approach, I try to simplify it to that. So say for a linear day, we're focused on acceleration or we're focusing on max velocity or we're focusing on that kind of curve sprinting pattern, whatever it may be. We have a focus. And so we will perform a drill. The drill. So after our initial, like we talked about, Michael, after our initial block 0, I individualize that as well. So we do start off with some type of drill. We videotape everything. And then from there, we always finish, after that drill, we always finish with some type of perception action activity, even on our linear speed days, and then obviously on our lateral speed days. So we always try to finish with that reactive component. And then from there, we look, we do some video analysis and look to see, okay, are these drills, because I still see value in drills. I still, especially with the age the age population I work with, these kids still don't have the appreciation of, their total body angle or, where their foot position needs to be. They still need to understand that. And the drills are the time where I can be hands-on, so to speak. But after that, it's hands off, let them figure it out. And then from there we see, okay, these drills are helping athlete A, but athlete B, this drill's a waste of time. So then we adjust. And I tell my athletes, I go every single time, I'm trying to find the right piece to the puzzle. And there's going to be times where it works and there's times that it's not going to work. And I'm always trying to find that right piece. So we usually use those drills at the beginning to have the athletes appreciate, different positions, angles, force vectors, direction of force application, all that kind of stuff. And then we allow the reactive stuff to see if those drills are, making a difference. And we do the same thing on lateral days. We'll pick a skill, whether say it's a shuffle, it's a crossover, it's, any one of these transitional movements, and we'll do it in, I don't want to say a closed manner, but it's typically with my high school guys, we do some type of resisted shuffle or crossover and some contrast work where we do it unloaded. And then immediately after, we go right into, one of those perception action activities. And then from there, designing those kind, instead of it being a linear focus, when it's basically multi-directional, then that's when we play around with the workspace, with different obstacles, with, different training tools, anything, the environment, like we were talking about. There's so many different ways that we can, manipulate what we want without them knowing. And so I might say, hey, today, the skill of the day, if you want to say it, is a shuffle. So we're going to do this drill. And then when we go into the reactive component, okay, they're in their mind, they're like, all right, I'm gonna have to do some type of shuffle, but me as the coach saying, okay, well, no, I want to try to get some backpedaling in, or some type of deceleration front, plant step or back plant step, whatever it may be. So I design the activities around whatever the skill we're focusing on. So.
I want a question there. So you mentioned you video everything. So after the sessions or at the end of the week or the day, I don't know how you do. Are you viewing that from a coaching standpoint, or are you viewing it with the athlete?
So we do. So that's something new we are actually starting to incorporate. So I spend multiple hours every night after so we have groups up to 9 p.m. I'm here till midnight. I go through every single video, and then I pick and choose, obviously, because I'm taking 300-400 videos a day. I'll go through them. I'll pick 2 or 3, basically ones where I think, okay, this was effective, this was ineffective. And then once a week, and I started this with a couple of our athletes recently. It used to be kind of whenever I saw fit, but now once a week we actually have a meeting where I'll say, hey guys, you need to schedule this time. And it's exactly what you do with your sport. You'd have your video analysis sessions. And so we have kids come in, and it's right now, my technology is my phone. And so we just look at the phone, but I'm showing them, and I'm not telling them up front, what was the right or wrong way. I'm asking them, I'm saying, hey, what do you think of this? And then from there, we just create a dialogue. How do you feel? But in whatever, I'm letting the athlete kind of dictate what they're going to say. And then I will say, okay, well, we need to see more of this, or we need to see less of this. But this is after. I don't do it right at, like if I did it during the session, then that's, in my opinion, I think that's counterproductive, because then the kids are going to overthink, be too analytical, because they have enough people in the ears with their parents and the other sport coaches, which you guys know, it's too much. So I typically try to do it once a week after the fact. But I still I think it's very, very important. These kids need to see what they're doing as well, because they do it for the sport. Why can't they do it with what we do too? So
yeah, I think Scott Solwasser from Texas Tech said their strength staff films all of their movement sessions, and then they just like a football staff would film, review practice or a game.
Exactly.
They, as a staff, review their film from their movement session, break it down, talk, collaborate, and then make adjustments for the next time. I love that concept, and especially with today's today's athlete, they are very in tune to video. I mean, they grew up with a camera in their hand their whole life, and they love to see video. And many of them learn so much better that way than, like you said, trying to explicitly coach them to a position.
And honestly, I use it too, because I deal with parents a lot, because I'm dealing with kids under the age of 18. And it's one thing I tell, the parents, like, how's my kid doing? Or why is my kid not doing this? Or what's going on? And I show them videos. I say, hey, this is what's happening. This is what I think. This is what they need to improve on. If they don't, this is what I think will happen. And so I use it too as a not only for the athletes, but for the parents as well, to say, hey, this is reality, because there's a lot of parents that don't live in reality, especially in the hockey world, which is 75%, 80% of my clientele right now. They think their kid is the next big thing, when it's interesting. But I use it for multiple reasons. So.
Perfect. Tommy, anything you want to add on or unpack with that?
Yeah, I'm trying to revisit the question here. So the question is what I'm looking at, like in the sessions and stuff, or prior to the sessions with organizing.
Yeah. How are you organizing your movement sessions? What's your game plan going into it? Is there how are you attacking it? How are you addressing it? Your feedback, facilitation. Are you structuring linear, lateral days, etc.? Anything you want to add?
I think it's all dependent. Working in the private industry is a needs analysis on how many times. Like, obviously, it's for pay. So it's seeing how many times I get them, what they're getting and stuff. And usually I'll direct like, hey, you need to show up on these days because you're great. I don't need to touch you as much on high velocity. Like this kid actually just naturally knows how to run top end speed. So I'm going to say, hey, you got to come these days because those are my multi-directional days. So typically, what I do with a lot of my sessions is at the beginning, one time you saw some of the videos like with lunge variations that I do is it allows me to coach when I need to coach. So what I do is at the beginning is I'll call it like lunge explore or shuffle explore. I allow them to, and I say you can't do the same lunge pattern twice. And so what it allows them to do is it allows them to get outside their body, allows them to try to get outside their thought and say, okay, but it also shows me how they're going to solve problems because they instantly think about something right away. And it's constant. They see that stuff. So sometimes on my multi-directional dates, I love doing these lunge explorers, these shuffle explorers where they're going side to side, changing direction. Some of them will jump. They get a little unrealistic, but honestly, I allow it because I don't think any of these kids ever jumped over a fence when they were younger. So I kind of allow it because I'm just kind of like, you know what, whatever. That looks great because I don't think you've ever fallen down here. But I think a way I like organizing my multi stuff is stuff like that, where it allows them to see the patterns that they just choose. And a lot of them choose a lot of the same ones over and over without even knowing they do it. So sometimes what happens is these guys get a little chaotic, but at the same time, what it allows them to do is see what it is. So, and then it gets into kind of what I can see, what I might have to like grab a kid every now and then. If we are doing, a 5-minute drill back to back to back to back, where I'm not coaching much, but I know where I need to probably do that. Like this kid's so uncomfortable stopping on his left leg. He'll always do a 1 to 2 cut where all of a sudden he's just always on his right leg. So during that time, for me to still allow them to explore, but for me to coach, I'll say, hey, try to get on that left leg a lot, man. Try to work on that today. And then if I'm seeing my athletes over and over again, I'll start seeing a lot of their compensations, let alone a lot of their movement patterns that they're like constantly going to and not exploring. So all of a sudden I'm like, hey, let's not do what you're good at today, and kind of challenge them. Where they get kind of frustrated, but I kind of challenge them and say, hey, you can't do that side shuffle to sprint like during the warm up. When we get game time, I know you're going to do it because you're really good at it. So that's kind of how I like facilitating those multi-directional stuff. I kind of lost the lateral stuff. I've worked a lot more multi-directional and just kind of changed the constraint to fix what I need to do for those guys, where I used to do a lot of kind of side shuffling and stuff like that, but I like doing that with a lot of new guys because you can't really shuffle fast, so they can't really get hurt. So it's kind of nice with some of the new guys to get introduced to mirror drills or having someone stand in the way when they're have people standing in the way or an object in the way when they're trying to shuffle, because it's not high speed. A lot of the our populations that me and James both working with are middle school, high school guys, so they're uncomfortable already, like moving fast into lunge cuts, into shuffling, into something. So it allows them to get a little bit more comfortable with that kind of stuff. But I've lately been really shifting my gears depending on the sport, trying to make it more game related than I ever have been, and really taking situations that are kind of replicate what they're kind of doing. So I guess that's kind of how I do that. But again, it also shows me where they're weak and then where we can go into the weight room. So it also shows me their compensation, saying, man, dude, like you have no hip stability. You have like no trunk stability. You have none of this. So we're going to really auxiliary you here, there, and there. If that kind of.
Yeah, perfect. I love the concept of letting athletes explore. That's something I've started to do a lot more in our warm-ups, is just instead of just doing your general warm-up where, your general movement, dynamic movements where the athletes are zoned out for 10 minutes because they've done it a million times, is forcing them to explore, and they explore different spaces and different positions. So they're actually present and they're actually engaged and they're actually aware of what's going on in the warm up, rather than just, inchworms or a lunge step with rotation where they're going through the motions half the time. But so that's one way I've really started to add some of those exploration movements and initiate some of that perception action coupling. Are you guys doing anything during your warm-ups that are kind of what have you changed some things in your warm-ups that have allowed athletes to be a little bit more exploration or initiate some of that perception?
Yeah, without a question. So we do our warm up. We call it pre-training. I just hate the fucking word warm up. I feel like it's just not productive. But anyways, our pre-training is we have 5 zones, and so I'm really big on not doing the same shit over and over and over again, because personally, for me as a coach, I fucking hate the warm up pre-training. I don't like to warm up or pre-train myself, so. But it is essential. So what we do is we have 5 zones, depending on the day. We'll do zone 1 and 3 or zone 2 and 5 or whatever it may be. I mix and match it. But a big change is that a lot of it is partner reactive. So we will do what we call our absorption drills, where it's basically in place. It's you've probably seen the video I've seen, and you do something very, very similar, where it's just in place, ankle jumps, where you just talk about bang for your buck. But it's very 1v1. We also do it where it's 3 athletes, where they, where it's basically one guy goes on offense, he leads, the other guy's got to react. And so so you start with an ankle jump, and then you drop in. We use different stances when an athlete first comes in. We teach them all these stances. And we use it as a reference system, but very simple. We have an athletic, a jump, a single leg, a lateral squat, a knee punch, a split squat. So we have these different stances, and so the kid would drop as fast as they can into the stance. The defense has to try to beat them down there. And so what we'll do is, we'll start it off. We'll have them, just start to drill. Every rep they alternate offense, defense. But then as they get going, we might throw a ball at them. We might change the environment, where we might change the surface, or we might honestly, to the point where we might change the music. We might change. So we try to change just different things to see if it affects their that perception and that cognition. But absorption drills is one. Another thing that we do is, especially on we do it on our linear and lateral days as well, where we call it partner reactive skills. And so instead of doing, your typical A march, A skip, running A's, which I still think are value, especially for the younger athletes. But for my older, meaning the high school level, where I'll pick a skill. Same guy on offense, guy on defense. You're performing that skill. The guy on defense, you react to them. And the cool thing, and Michael, I think this is something that you do, because I'm a big believer on teaching deceleration mechanics. And I think deceleration is, especially with the age we work with, that ability to accept force needs to be our utmost. That's got to be our priority. So we have them always stick in some type of stance. And then basically we have our athletic, or we have our front or back foot deceleration plant step. And I'll change that rep to rep. I'll be like, all right, guys, offense, this is the skill. So say it's a reposition step. Defense, you need to mirror. So you basically do the same. You replicate. If the offense steps back right, defense, you step back right. Offense is leading. I give the workspace, so I manage, okay, are we going 5 yards? Are we going 10? Are we going 15? So I manage the workspace to manage the overall workload. But the offense dictates when they stop. And when they stop, it's either in that kind of parallel athletic stance, or they're in that whichever they pick the deceleration stance they want. And I basically tell my guys that every rep, I want something different. I want you guys to challenge the defender. I want you guys to, really from rep to rep, really just, like you were saying, Tom, it's just I want them uncomfortable. And the more I can get them uncomfortable, and by simply just having them react to someone, it's amazing when you see what you see their true motor response. And you see, them in a controlled setting upstairs, if I had them just, do some ankle drops by themselves, ankle jumps, and then drop in the athletic stance, they look great. But when they need to react to someone and they're accelerating and then they got to stop, it's a whole nother ball game. And so that's something that we've seen a huge, huge difference over the last 2 months. And even guys just saying, like, because it's been a huge transition, and not to, get off track, but even in the weight room, we've been spending less time. We'll spend like 20, 30 minutes before we'd spend an hour. We're spending less time in the weight room, and these guys are feeling stronger than ever. So it's really interesting to see the change and to see the impact and the buy-in that you get when you get this whole, that perception action coupling idea. So those are kind of the two big big things is what we do is with the absorption drills and with our partner reactive skills. And then after the partner reactive skills, then we will go into whatever skill we're focusing for that speed work.
Absolutely. That was awesome. Tommy?
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit on the other different side, a little bit. One thing I like to do with my dynamic warm-up is it's similar every day because they do need some direction for me. I've noticed with a lot of my guys, they do need a little bit of direction, but still a little bit of exploration. They still allow, they still come in and they understand like a quadruped series where they're working on trunk stability, mobility, and being able to separate their hips at the same time, like one's away. So they know that. I love doing that for corrective exercise. I've used my warm up for a lot of corrective exercises, things with guys where they're really weak. A lot of it's posture. And if that posture isn't their priority when they're walking on one leg, I've seen so much gain. A lot of the guys in my, if I have five things that they have to do each day, I've noticed a lot of these guys are really comfortable with it. Pronation, supination on the foot when the foot's flat. And a lot of these guys are getting more comfortable because I can notice who don't do my warm up well in terms of like the prep for it. They struggle a lot because what they display in my warm up is typically what they'll display when we work out. So typically if they come in lazy and I have an opportunity to kind of get on them and make them do things, or if they come in and they're really receptive, they're able to do it. So I've noticed a lot of my walk-in series and stuff like that they're able to get a lot of corrective exercises. Their hips aren't tucking, they're not reaching and pulling and yanking and still able to learn how to separate their hips when they do run. Like a lot of guys struggle with that and stuff like that. So I show them kind of why I have a handful of exercises they need to perform during the warm-up because they're corrective, and teaching their posture to stay strong when they're moving and stuff like that. But then, we can get into, like I call them awkward squats. They're not allowed to perform the same squat, the same squat twice. So it won't be a necessarily bodyweight squat, but it will be a squat, and I get to see them explore. They get to see where they're tight, where they're not tight. They get to see what hurts, what doesn't hurt. And then I, might give them a minute and say, hey, you guys got a handful of exercises that we've learned and done. Feel free to hit what you need to hit in terms of what you feel prepped in terms of to get going. So a lot of these guys will still have a little bit of ownership. At the beginning, when I first introduced it, they still, again, were staring at me like a deer in the headlights. Like, what do you mean I get to do what I want? And so typically, yeah, some guys come in and their glutes hurt, their hamstrings hurt. And I'm like, well, we'll go ahead and hit, we have a handful of exercise, but I try to change it, for them consistently, but I still keep it somewhat familiar because then I won't have something to assess, because it's still my assessment on what they're strong and what they're weak in. If they can stand on one leg and have hip stability, if they have knee stability, ankle stability, it still allows me to assess instead of for me aimlessly kind of just saying, here, we're going to do this separately every day. For me with middle school and high school, it's also been great for me to talk to their parents and show them like, hey, this is why I have him doing this homework, these isolated based exercises, because I only see him a certain amount of times a day, or the homework that I give them. And then I can see if they literally are serious enough of when we're training, like doing their homework and stuff. Like, a lot of it might be side bend, and these guys are just so weak in side bend. So I'm giving them exercises to do in regards to on their own or something like that. So it still allows me to have somewhat of a general assessment, because I'm not just saying, well, look, well, today he looks like this, yesterday he looked like this. I just have something to kind of go by, but it's still not, the same every single day, but it's familiar is kind of what I more use is a familiar thing, because it allows them to get good at something as well. If I tell them they're weak in something, they expose something in regards to just a corrective exercise in their room, they're like, well, I need you to do that correctly. And as they're gradually getting better at it, I can see, okay, they move a lot better. I've just causation versus correlation. I've noticed they typically move a lot better when they get on one foot or they do this. And then we get into lunge reaction stuff where it's stationary and then it's moving, and then they just gradually just pick up like the top of the roller coaster. They just get introduced to it, because sometimes, I might have, some guys who are uncomfortable or just coming back from sport in season. And we talked about reactive, but training, like James was saying, that environment's completely different in reaction when we're training than it is in a game. for some reason. We try to replicate it, but we can't do that well of that extent of a game-related situation. So it's noticing that they get back introduced to things, and okay, it's stationary. Okay, we're dropping into a lunge. We're shuffling side to side to a jump. We're doing something different, but still allowing them to get reintroduced to some of it instead of just kind of pulling up out of the water and completely failing them. So that's kind of a basis.
Perfect. Now, how long are you guys typical sessions, and kind of what time do you guys allot towards more the movement portion and then kind of the weight room portion?
So for us, it all depends. So depending on, our groups are organized by age. We have 4 different levels. Each level will have a different duration, but also depending on the time of year. Obviously, we get athletes in season. So we break our program up: preseason, in season, post, and off season. So it's basically a quarterly type thing, seasonal type thing. And we have kids come to me I'm very fortunate, very, very fortunate, especially with the hockey culture. They see the importance. They are crazy, but they see the importance of this type of training and realize that this is part of the package. This is part of their sport. So I get kids year round, which is rare. So it depends on the season. It depends on the age level. The most will go, and I'm known for going over, and I get parents that call me out on it and athletes that call me out because whatever I want to get done for the day, that's the time I want. So sometimes if it's 2 hours, sometimes if it's 45 minutes, I want to give what the kid needs. So that's the most important thing. But from a business, you gotta stick to your schedule. So anywhere, for our fundamental group, which is our little guys, 8 years old to 11, they're about an hour and 10. And then it can get up to 2 hours with our peak group, which is basically the oldest, the 19 plus group. From a programming standpoint, so with the pre-training, so our pre-training, it really depends, again, on the season, because if a kid's coming off, because with working with ice hockey players, we, especially coming in season and postseason, we need to spend time. These kids, like Tommy was saying, they need to understand what their strengths, what their weaknesses, and as you know, with hockey guys, their hips. That's their moneymaker, and you got to make sure that we address the tissue quality, the appreciation of where their pelvis is, because every single one of those kids have an anterior tilt and they are rotated to some degree. It's I'm not saying every single hockey athlete, because of the nature of the sport, they come in with some type of anterior tilt and some type of rotation, no matter what. So we need to address this, and that's the time, and I like what Tommy said, but that's the time that I can say, hey, okay, you see how when you're in this half-kneeling stance, you can't turn your glute on? That is going to be problematic when we go down the road and we do our speed agility type work. We need to focus on that. So I put a huge emphasis on that type of stuff, but I give them ownership. They need to do it. So when kids, with my older athletes, when they come in, they know if I say zone 1, that's soft tissue work, that's our stick series, that's our quadruped series, that's our half kneel. I let them choose because these guys, again, I'm fortunate. I've had athletes that have been with me 6+ years since I started, kind of going off on my own. So they understand, they know all the different series. They know the different soft tissue work, but they'll come in zone 1. They know it's soft tissue work. It's our mobility stuff. It's our breathing. We always, so after the soft tissue, we always do some type of breathing work to realign, get the hips, get the pelvis and the ribs aligned. And then it's some type of mobility work. And then after that, then we'll figure out whatever I think they need. So honestly, pre-training could be sometimes 8 minutes. It could be sometimes a half hour. I try to keep it as short as possible, but if they need to spend extra time, then guess what? We're going to do extra time, and then it's going to be a low session. I might have it scheduled as a high session, but if I have a group of guys that come in and they're not feeling great and they're not prepared, then I'm changing the script. Because that's one unique thing we do here is that when an athlete comes in, we take their body weight. We have a subjective and objective measurement. So they'll come in, they'll 0 through 3, they'll tell us how they'll feel. 0 is if they come in and they're sick or they're injured, I'll send them home. A 1 is if they come in, they're sick or they're hurt, but they can still train. We'll make a modification. A 2 would be, they're normal, they feel fine. And a 3 is they're ready to attack it. And so from there, We then do we'll do our series, our pre-training. And after the pre-training, if they were, if they were a 1 or a 2, I'm going to start, it's going to get my mind saying, okay, am I going to need to change this? Because then after our pre-training, we always do some type of subjective feedback. I've recently got the GFlight, which is awesome. It's simple, it's effective, and literally it's one of the – I'm ordering 2 more. Actually, I'm ordering 3 more to have at each rack. I think it's that beneficial. But I'll have them do one of our 8 jumps and just look at it. I'll compare and contrast the subjective, objective feedback information, and then I'll say, hey, nope, we're sticking with the plan. Nope, we're changing it. And that's one thing our athletes, we're big on relationships, and so I really do trust the athletes that I work with. Obviously, when we have new guys, it's going to be a process, but for the most part, the guys that we have, I really do trust them, and I do believe that their subjective information is valuable. So it really depends. It was kind of a long answer to saying it depends, but it's, it could be our pre-training could be up to, 8 minutes, 30 minutes. And then when we get into our movement work, I could get carried away. We could, like I said, we might spend only 20 minutes in the strength, but it's what the kids need, man. It's really a lot of these kids that have been with me, they have the basic, we have guys that continuously deadlift. I mean, I have 10 high school juniors and seniors that trap bar deadlift 500 pounds for reps. I have them benching their body weight for 10 plus reps. Like, I have kids that are strong. I want to make sure I have kids that are great problem solvers. And so that's one thing where it all depends. So if I want to spend more time, then we're spending more time. And so we just got to take away. And so it's a give or take. If we're spending more time with our speed and agility, then we're taking away from the strength a little bit. And then I'll prioritize. What are we doing? Are we doing just our A1s? Are we going A1, B1, B2, whatever it may be? And my athletes know that whenever something's written down, it's probably going to be changed. And so that's just how I am. I want to make sure I, give the athlete what he needs, not what I want to give him or not what his parents or coaches want. It's what he needs. I think that's a really, really, and that's one thing it's unique being in the private sector, as you guys know, we can do that. We're fortunate enough that we can do that. And I think that's, the most effective way, when trying to work with an athlete. So it depends. Sorry, Michael.
Perfect. And I think it gets lost in coaches that movement, speed, and agility training has a strength effect. I mean, you'll never be able to mimic the ground reaction forces and muscle forces of max velocity sprinting in the weight room. So, and whatever the old saying is, speed will translate to the weight room. Weight room won't always translate to speed. I mean, you get a strength effect from doing the movement. So, like you said, your athletes are getting stronger and they feel stronger than ever, even though you're spending less time in the weight room.
So one thing real quick, Michael. So I had a kid. He's a typical meathead. I love him. He's a typical meathead because I'm a meathead at heart. But he's just a typical. I thought he would be a tough sell where we're doing really more of this movement stuff, and really putting an emphasis on it. Where we're like I said, we're taking away, especially on our high stress days, we're taking away from doing our assistive work. So we might just be doing squats. We might just be doing deadlifts. We might just be doing split squats. It's all dependent on the kid and what I see fit. But he came up to me, and this was 2 weeks ago. He came up to me. He goes, I don't get it. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, my numbers are going through the roof. And he's like, I'm doing less. I'm like, exactly. I was like, this is the reason that you've built the necessary strength, the appropriate strength. Now we need to kind of go into the next phase of your athletic development, which is this whole movement, this solving the problems, really in high velocity. This is the first time, and I'll admit it's the first time we've really done any top speed work. And it really is from a neuromuscular standpoint, from a injury reduction standpoint, because with my hockey guys, and not to get off point, but with my hockey guys is that when we do speed work, it's not necessarily for getting them faster. I teach them that I'm trying to build up that resiliency of the hip tissue, especially with the adductors, with the hip flexors. That's what I'm looking for. Like, yeah, if it's a plus, you get faster, great. And it's going to happen. But what I'm doing is I want to make sure that we're getting that psoas, we're getting that contralateral glute, we're getting the adductors, we're getting everything resilient so that when you go to play 6, 7, 8 month season, your hips are going to be unstoppable. So that's kind of it's very it's been an interesting change, but yeah. So
one more question that you mentioned after your kind of pre-training, you've been using the GFlight for jumps. Is this the vertical jump?
Yeah. So with the GFlight, we're measuring. So we have we have kids, they do 8 different jumps. We look at non-counter movement. We basically have 2 positions. Position 1 is, minimal knee bend. Position 2 is they choose their knee bend, what they feel comfortable, what they feel most powerful in. And then we have a counter movement. Then we have a repeated jump where it's 2 jumps, hands on hips. Then we have a drop jump with a dowel where I'm just looking at, them getting quick off the ground. And then we have a dip jump where they step off, full arm action, etc. And then we have 2 loaded jump variations. And so from there, depending on what I want to look at, because the performance metrics are in power output, so height in centimeters, or inches in centimeters in height, ground contact time, and the RSI, which the reactive strength index is, in my opinion, the most valuable metric on that device. And so I won't do all 8, but I'll pick one of those jump, have them do it, and I'll compare it to the baseline, compare it to the numbers that they have, and it will help me say, okay, so if a kid comes in and says he's a 3, and I know for a fact that this kid came in and his leg was amputated, he would still say he was a 3. But when he jumps and his performance is whatever, his RSI is down, from, a 2 to a, 1.2, then something is going on. And so I'll create the dialogue. So it just allows me, again, to give the athlete what they need, not what I want or what they want or their coaches want. So it's just another way for me to manage and auto-regulate their program.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for clarifying all that. Thanks. Tommy, how you set up your sessions in terms of length? How long are they? How much time are you dedicating towards movement in the weight room? How about you?
Absolutely. So I guess the best way I can explain it is we always move, jump, and lift dependent on obviously the thing. I've always looked at it kind of as like the pizza, kind of like movements the dough kind of thing, and jumping and plyometrics are a lot of like the pizza sauce and kind of whatever we are. And then the toppings is kind of where we need the strength training, because it's not aimless, but it's good. It's more of like, every sport moves typically, even golf, but, but in terms of change of direction, reactive based stuff like that I'm working with, they know that we're always going to move and we're always going to jump. Dependent on how we move is dependent on how they feel. Dependent on how we jump is dependent on how they feel. Again, just like James, I love that. I was taking notes a lot during yours. I absolutely love that. With kind of like seeing that, because I also have the GFlight, but we do that. So typically our movement prep, they don't really know when they start getting into it because it's such a gradual increase that they just all of a sudden are react and move. And then I'm like, grab a bar. But typically with sessions, I usually it's about with school and the athletes we work with, typically during school hours, Monday through Friday, the sessions are hour and 15 minutes. So I give it a grace period with a lot of these parents to say, hey, if I'm notorious as the guy my athletes know, I'll say 1 more rep, and I mean probably about 20 more, depending on what I need. I'm like 1 more rep, and then I'm like, because we got to move on. But then all of a sudden, either if they're engaged and they're in a high competitive environment, I'm not taking them out of it. We'll scrap the lifting because they are, first off, enjoying it. Second off, they're usually enjoying it because they're finally understanding what it is to solve problems. So, or they're actually competing. And so typically I'll just scrap it and I'll let them keep going. I think we've all probably been in that situation where our athletes are finally making decisions well and doing stuff. So sometimes I'll scrap it and we'll jump at the end. And so I like doing it when they're fatigued. But typically during school and stuff with my middle school, high school, even college guys, at times, Saturdays are a long session. They know it's going to be 1.5 hours to 2 hours because first off, I can get them when they're fatigued. They've probably gone through a whole entire training week. And I want to see what they look like, just like they'll probably during a game. They practice all week. And you're not showing up for a game typically like, man, I feel great. I'm so ready to go. So I love seeing their compensations, their decision-making. And I usually extend those sessions and even in business kind of plan for it. So I can make those sessions longer, but kind of see what they can't hide when they get fatigued, because usually when they're fatigued, they're going to go to typically the decisions they think are best and can't really think as much when we're really trying to accomplish something, when during the week, when, you know, I'll be a little bit more limited on rest period. I'll let them go for a lot longer. I'll separate it in sometimes like quarters. Sometimes I like doing it with, like, you know, I'm kind of heavy football oriented. So a lot of these guys, they'll have, you know, 5-minute quarters where they're moving and they're doing something consistently, and I'm not saying a thing, you know, and then we'll talk after it, and then we'll get back into the same drill, and they can kind of take what I coach them on, or kind of seeing, because again, even in a game, they're going to be able to get pulled out and be coached on. So I kind of don't want to overcoach them, but I still want to implement something of, like, man, let's see if you can adapt to this right away. Like, let's see if you can see that, dude, you only are crossing over today. Is your hips hurting, or is this hurting? Is your groin hurting yet? Like, you know, type things. Or, hey, you're not comfortable getting outside on a power cut, man. Like, hey, try to challenge that a little bit, you know, go, you know, in the back, you know, do some of the lunge variations we do where you're comfortable doing it, where I'm still not saying, hey, you need to plant here, you need to plant here, but I'm just saying, hey, plant outside your body. Power cut, you know, get out here and go back in the lines. Practice it before you get up there to see if, you know, it might work. So typically that's how I kind of like running things and stuff like that. And obviously I'm constrained myself, what a beautiful word for us to use, with these guys for other obligations they have with school, family, and stuff like that. So I'm obviously time is limited. And so regardless, we'll move every day and jump regardless. If lifting doesn't come to it, these guys the meatheads obviously get frustrated, and they're going to go to the YMCA later, or they're going to go do something, because that's just their need of feeling good about, like, accomplishing something. So that's kind of how mine roll, and kind of how it does.
Perfect. Now, kind of an open question here, but going into the weight room then, you know, how are you kind of structuring your lifting sessions in conjunction with your movement session? What would a typical kind of weight room, you know, like I said, very open, probably individualized, but what does your weight room sessions kind of look like? And what are some things you're trying to accomplish with your weight room?
Yeah, so we follow the high-low approach. So it's, you know, your typical on our day one, so say it's a linear focus, where it is dependent on the athlete, but we will have a primary strength movement. Obviously it's lower body. It's, you know, the most stressful lift. So I don't Olympic weightlift my athletes. And it's not that I have anything against Olympic weightlifting. I just I have a good friend. He's born and raised in Russia, but now he's over in the States, and he's a master of sport. And just talking to him and seeing, you know, messages from his coach that he's had for 20 something years, it's unbelievable the amount of work. It's just like playing football. It's just like, you know, playing basketball. It's a sport. It's too, in my opinion, you know, it's too much, especially when we're trying to address everything else. It's just on the bottom of my list, so I've gotten rid of it. But we will do explosive, you know, we do a ton of explosive loaded jumps, and obviously context specific, but with our high school guys, we will do loaded jumps. I'm a huge believer in loaded bounds, especially with my hockey guys. We do different loaded bounds with dumbbells onto boxes. We have, you know, different movements for different guys, whether it's a lateral or a diagonal bound, but I am a component, and I don't see many people, you know, doing it that way, but I think there is value in doing loaded bounds. So our explosive strength will be organized depending on our movement. But from a maximal strength standpoint, we'll have our max effort day. So we run basically a max effort, dynamic effort focus. I do see value in that, especially as the kid gets older and has more experience underneath a bar. Because the guys that aren't, so a guy that has been with me for under a year, I like using the 5-3-1. We follow the 5-3-1 method, but then we will transition into kind of a max effort, dynamic effort, you know, so more of that, you know, heavier loading day, and then more of that explosive, high speed, loaded day. And then within that, depending on the athlete, we might do something where if you're doing a 2-leg, if you're squatting, so say it's a bilateral squat on one day, you're doing a single leg on the other day, you know, with the speed work, or it's vice versa. Or honestly, it really depends on kid, but we really do have kind of that max effort, dynamic effort split. And then after that, really depends on the training block. So I'm a huge fan of Cal Dietz triphasic. I'm a big, I love it. So we do follow. I do it a little bit differently, especially right now this time of year. We go extended isometric, eccentric, isometric again, because I think isometrics are extremely valuable. And then into kind of that concentric dynamic focus blocked. With some of the guys after that too, we will have a peaking block. And with my older guys, we will peak twice a year in that kind of format. We will do it in the spring and in the summer because I'm fortunate enough to have these kids year round, and I have the time to really set out that length and be able to peak them twice. But anyway, so depending on that, we'll determine what we do from a assistive standpoint. And with the assistive movements, that's when we're following kind of that, extended iso, eccentric iso, concentric type stuff. And really depending on the athlete, we'll determine what training methods. We have a bunch of different methods for each focus, whether it's eccentric, like I said, or isometric, concentric. Big fan of doing complex and contrast work. Really, it just talk about bang for your buck and time efficiency, parent strength with power. I see I'm a huge fan of that, and I'm a big fan of whatever you want to call it, but French contrast. We set up two different kinds. We have a general and specific depending on the athlete. But that's kind of in a nutshell how we kind of organize the strength.
Tommy?
Absolutely. Breaks my heart because I'm an ex-competitive Olympic weightlifter. I competed nationally. It kills me.
Hey, I'm still a fan of Olympic weightlifting, man.
I'm kidding. Well, I'm not really, but no. So typically, I love doing a total lower upper. It's also dependent, just like you were saying. I mean, sometimes I get guys year round, but sometimes it's not. So I got to do a quick needs analysis.
Exactly.
Like that. I'm a huge fan again of triphasic. I've been messing around with it for a long time. I've absolutely loved it. I personally have gone through it when I was training to go up things, and then I also incorporated it in the Olympic lifting world and just blew it out of the water with a lot of this stuff. So typically these guys know that they're going to do usually if I get them, they're going to do some sense of a pull. They're going to get a knee hip extension. You're not going to ever hear me say triple because I can't ever get that ankle to get fully extended. But I usually really have them when I cue things in terms of a pulling exercise, whether it's a hang clean, a power clean, I only have them focus on the knee up with their hips because it really engages their glutes. So typically a lot of my guys, they'll hear me engage them. So typically I love doing, depending on what we do with the total lower upper. So a hang clean to a contrast method as well in regards to a squat, or I'll do it depending on a high velocity day. I'll couple that contrast with hang cleans or some sense of a hang clean's a way to jump and then into a jump and then a banded jump or with a back squat. So typically it's also dependent on what type of day we're going after, where if it's conditioning tissue on a multi-directional day, they're going to do a lot of awkward squats in a lot of different ways, a lot of different lunges, and get in really weird positions. Again, we get back to my warm-up where it's like they can't do the same squat. And they get a little more comfortable, but kind of light strength training in regards to some of that stuff. So typically that's what will look like is a total body lift. I love getting extension for these guys. It's also a lot of medicine ball work. I don't have the room for it as much, and depending on Colorado with the weather, you might be guessing and checking. It's so bipolar here. It's amazing. So I like doing some of that stuff too, dependent on if the athlete has never even been underneath the bar. But I usually teach them pretty quick and pretty fast with some of that stuff. A lot of guys aren't even getting the benefit of it because they're so uncomfortable with a bar. So that's typically when I'll bring them to a medicine ball style stuff and have them throw some stuff just so they understand how fast I need them to move a bar and the intent behind why we're lifting the way we're lifting. And then it'll get into a lower body lift and stuff like that. And then an upper. I love the push pull incorporated with that. If we do a lower body push, I don't get them for long. So we're going to take advantage of pulling something upper body. And then, back squat pull-ups, stuff like that, or split squat pull-ups. And then lower body or upper body lift with a lower body pull. So they're still, getting some heavy RDLs at the same time. They're doing some dumbbell bench or whatever it is. So typically it's that, but again, it's such a broad question, but a beautiful question with depending on where they're at during the season, where I'm getting them, how I'm getting them. It's not just like, hey, we're getting strong, that's not really me. These guys, I think I even got some. I think I had lower back, stress fractures because they just said more. And I said, absolutely. I missed the last one, but I'd love to put on more weight. And I think it's just lower back. My lower back is trashed from Olympic weightlifting with constantly hearing more, and just stressing it without teaching load and seeing that my midsection couldn't handle the load. But stuff like that. So again, it's back to the needs analysis and saying, where are they at in their season? What do they need? Do they need to even reestablish bend? So I can still make it individualized if a lot of these guys come to my elite groups where it's like, hey man, you're off season, and they're going to perform the same exercises in a different rep scheme. They might establish a little bit more bend. So I don't feel overcoached, but they can still do the same thing, where sometimes I used to get really overwhelmed with like, you need to join my other group because you're off season, you're this. And I was like, you know what, I can tailor it to fit you. You're going to join the same group, but your load, you're not loading it. You're going to establish some bend. You're going to get comfortable with depth again. You're going to get full range of motion with things. And they just know, a lot of my guys who've worked with me for a while have known like, okay, they trust me and I trust them as well with the relationship aspect of being able to get full range of motion, establish bend, establish those things, and then we kind of go from there, and then they kind of pick back up and try to get back into it, because we all know how 14 to 18-year-old boys get with terms of measuring up to one another. It's fun to watch and relate to, but yeah, typically that's kind of how it goes.
Perfect. Thanks, guy. That was good answers. What are some reading materials or books that have really influenced you guys over the last years? What would you recommend for coaches that maybe want to get more information on some of the things you've talked about? What are some readings or books that you guys would recommend?
Oh God, I'm so bad at that. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't read. Honestly, I will say the last book I read wasn't a training book. It was Ray Dalio's Principle. I think it's called Principles. But that was the last book I read. Honestly, man, the biggest thing, I can direct them with different social media sources and stuff like that, but for me it's application, man. It's just really looking at the sport. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not a big research guy. I'm not a data collector. I'm not, and I know that the technology is out there and it's important. Heck, I just bought a GFlight and I'm incorporating it. But I'm a big person, a big believer, on okay, looking at the sport, looking at the athlete, and just experiment on myself, experiment on athletes that have had the experience and that have my trust. And it's just like I said at the beginning, finding the piece to the puzzle, but it's just applying it and then figuring what works, what doesn't. Keep what works, throw out what doesn't, and then just keep moving on and keep evolving like that. But I learned by doing. I'm just not a big. I don't read podcasts. I can say follow your podcast, follow Just Fly. Obviously, is a great resource. All things strength and wellness. Robbie Bork, his podcast is unbelievable as well. CVAS, that's another great podcast. I'm a big. I have a 2-year-old. So being a business owner, I don't have a lot of time to read. So when I'm driving, especially when she's cranky and she needs to sleep, we get in the truck and I tell my wife she's either going to be a great entrepreneur or a hell of a physical preparation coach, because that's all we listen to in the truck. So from a learning standpoint, those are the podcasts. But yeah, I'm not a big book guy.
Tommy?
Absolutely. The funny thing is I used to say I hated reading, and then finding out that's kind of where I needed to go. I think James would agree with the Facilitator Training. You got to read that book.
Oh, of course.
I think he does an awesome job explaining application as well. Super Training. Haven't read the whole thing, but there's so much into that. Anything on ecological dynamic systems, just Google it and read. I have to drop this because Sean, and that's Nikolai Bernstein, man. You've got to read some of his stuff, and I love it because when I read some of his stuff, it's sometimes a foreign language because it's so foundational. And if you don't know what some of those foundational words mean, affordances or ecological psychology, a lot of this stuff, or a lot of this stuff, I love being able to like I'm also an application guy because I used to dislike reading, but when I read it and then I'm able to apply it in conversation, it just clicks for me so well where I'm like coming up through examples and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've read that here. So anything in terms of that stuff, I absolutely love. I have been just kind of through a lot of that stuff and finding a lot of that stuff. Off the market for sure. Anything dynamic systems, anything ecological psychology. I love that kind of stuff just because it incorporates so much of that behavior, brain, and biomechanics with these guys and perception action stuff that we get into. So for sure, people who are meatheads, try basic training, super training, and then just Google and you will find out with books with Keith Davids and stuff like that I've been directed to. Watching other people and then honestly listening via podcasts, stuff like that is amazing, but I go grab the books. I like grabbing the way people think about things instead of just kind of what they have. So like the way they do it. And that's the cool thing about when you start studying ecological psychology, when you start doing constraints-led approach, anything on constraints-led approach as well. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. They're going to teach you how to do it. And that's the greatest thing, but it's the most frustrating thing at times when it's just like, just tell me what to do. But it's also a beautiful thing because a lot of these books they're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to teach you how to do it. And that's such a good foundation when you get that foundation for how and applying why you're doing something. Like, this is why we are doing this. A lot of my athletes know why we're doing something, or I can explain it, but that's just short, brief thing of why.
Perfect. Well, guys, that's all I had. I mean, is there anything, want to give you guys an opportunity, any last thoughts float through your head or, things that have come up during this conversation or just anything you'd like to add or share? Now's the time.
Yeah, Michael, I did read a book. I lied. Game Speed. I have a recommendation. Game Speed by Ian Jeffries. There's a lot of good information, honestly, especially with this whole the perception action type stuff and teaching movement as skills. I think that you can get a lot of value out of the Game Speed book. It was well written and it was simplified, and I really like just how he broke it down into the three initiation, transition, and actualization movements. I think that's awesome. So I have to say Game Speed. So to the people out there, I do read, so I had Game Speed my resource.
That's awesome. I think the one thing I want to encourage people to do is my athletes will hear me say this a lot, and even in this industry, it's really hard. But I see a lot of people. If we look at our athletes as a car, we're building the frames and the engines without teaching these guys how to steer it. A lot, we look good and we're really fast straight ahead, but a lot of these guys aren't learning how to steer the car. And let alone being a coach, being from Colorado with the mountains. There's a lot of, windy roads and stuff like that. And I used to think that the guardrails were what kept the car on the road when it's really the driver. And it's like, I can be their guardrail and they need to learn how to drive. So I would just encourage a lot, and little on myself is like, stop just building the frames and the engines of these guys and start teaching these guys how to make decisions and move. Cause we got a lot of semis, we got a lot of trucks, we got a lot of fast cars. But again, if you give the keys to some of these cars or these kids, the keys to a car that's really fast, some of them don't even know how to drive it. They're just like, oh, this is so out of control. I have no idea what to do. So I think that's just something I just would, anybody, encourage you to get uncomfortable, and be comfortable getting uncomfortable, because we got to start teaching our athletes how to steer cars, but make the right decisions when they're driving it.
That was a great, Tommy. That was awesome, man.
Hey, Michael, let me add one thing too, with the whole, because that was great. To build off of that, and I think that, and I don't want to say, generation to generation, but kids aren't kids anymore. Okay. And I had this conversation with one of the parents, and I asked, and the kid was, just to give an idea, the kid was 10 years old, and I asked, when was the last time he played outside? Just a simple question. When was the last time he played with his friends? Because everything is scheduled. Everything is, okay, I'm doing this on Monday, this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday. Their whole life is planned. And I asked, like, when was the last time you played outside? And they honestly could not give me an answer. And so one thing for coaches, I think we need to appreciate, especially when we have younger kids or even older kids, that it's different now. Kids aren't out there playing manhunt, capture the flag. They're not establishing these general abilities, these general skills. So we need to really appreciate that and understand that. And also the stress level. All right. We can't have this mindset of, okay, they're coming to us, and it's separate than what they're doing for their sport. It's separate than what they're doing at school. Stress is stress. And I can't say that enough. And that's something I constantly tell my parents, is that, we can only handle so much stress. And yes, they're kids. And because every time you think of the word stress, you think of adults, you think of older athletes. But even an eight-year-old, they're under stress. And we need to appreciate that. We need to appreciate that they lack the general skills, and they have way too much stress at such an early age. And so I want coaches to, we need to appreciate that. We need to factor that in.
That was a hell of a way to end it, man. That was great. I'm sure listeners have a lot to unpack with this. You guys can't thank you guys enough for sharing such in-depth information on what you guys do, how you do it, why you do it, etc. So I just want to thank you guys, because I got a couple pages of notes here that I was taking during this whole time. I really appreciate what you guys do. Listeners, please follow these guys on Instagram, Twitter. They share what they do. They give insight. They communicate. So I just want to thank you two personally, very deeply. Thanks for coming on. It's Sunday. It's Mother's Day. But you guys found an hour and a half to come on here and shoot the breeze with me. So I really, really appreciate you guys.
Michael, thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully more to come, and stay in touch so we can get more conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, guys. Appreciate it. Join me in thanking today's guest for a wonderful episode. If you guys took something away from this episode, please share it on the social media website of your choice, and thank our guests for the wonderful opportunity that we had to learn from them. And as always, we'll see you guys next time on the Elite Performance Podcast.